Okay, so we've got from first week, we've got the letter bet being 2. From last week, we've got the dual energy of masculine and feminine energy in Adam, the original human being. And then we've got Adam being split into male and female from the masculine and feminine. We've got Adam and Eve. So it's very important that we've got Adam the man and we've got Adam the human. And those two have the same name, but we are talking about 2 different concepts. Adam the human is where I want to begin this week, because I finished with a very interesting idea last week. And that is that the root of the word Adamah, which is earth, right? The earth is the biblical word for the ground, for the earth, not planet earth, but the physical earth from where things grow. When we talk about that is Adamah. Adamah is spelled Aleph Daled Mem Hey, which the first 3 letters, Aleph Daled Mem, spells the Hebrew word Adam, which is human, mankind. So the human has this relationship with the earth. Now, I'm going to give you your Safaria link again. Give me a moment and I'll post it again so we can just look at some pretty cool words. I'll get it for you and then I'll post it. Okay, I'm just going to post this in the chat box. It's a link to Safaria, and you can use that link, or if you've got a Chumash at home, you can use that. So, and what I'll do at the same time is I'm actually going to share my screen for those that don't want to pop back and forth. Okay. Now, I hope you can see my screen. Can you see my screen of Safaria? Yeah? Okay. So I'm here, Genesis 1:1.
Sorry, Menachem, you're sharing the other screen.
Okay. What was the other screen? I'll try that again. My what? It was my desktop. Okay.
Yeah, another one popped up. Originally, it was okay.
Okay, we'll try it again. Okay, how's that?
Good.
Right.
Gracious.
Lovely. So I'm just gonna, you can still see it, right?
Yep.
Good, hasn't disappeared. Okay, so I'm just scrolling along through the 6 days of creation. Oh, and I've gone too far already. Here we are. Vayivra Elohim es ha'adam, and Hashem created the person, the human, but Salma in his image, but Tselem Elohim, in the image of God, bara esay, created it. Zachor nekeva bara esam. So that was last week. Remember that Hashem created the human in his image. I'm just scrolling backwards. Now I'm going forwards again. We've got the instruction. Okay, so he's created the person and told him to go forth and multiply and all that. And speaking about the human inheriting the land and engaging with the whole world. Okay, then we've got Shabbat, which
or he created Chava. So he
no. At this point, we've just got Adam, the human,
and he created Adam and told him, in a way, to go forth and multiply.
Yes,
it was one.
Right. So obviously, as a single entity, there must be some capacity to multiply, but the multiplying doesn't. The multiplying doesn't actually happen until we get to what we're coming up here. So it's an interesting question, Benny. Like, why not do it after he's separated the two? And so one interesting commentary on that is that is given the instruction to go forth and multiply, not necessarily can Adam multiply, but Adam now has the capacity to multiply. So it's a bit like a child. You tell a child, when you're older, start a family. At this point, the child lacks the sexual maturity, the hormonal development to be able to actually start a family, but has everything inside them. At this point, a female body has the eggs. It's just a matter of time, maturation, development of the body, at which point they will be able to procreate. So that was an interesting idea that I learned years back, that Adam is given the instruction, even though Adam hasn't got the capacity just yet. Another way is that maybe Adam did have some sort of capacity in this hybrid state. Now, I just want to bring your attention to here. This is chapter 2, verse 7. So this is a bit of a repetition of what the Torah is giving us, a repetition with new details of creation, particularly as it relates to the creation of the human. Vayitzer Hashem Elikim es Adam, and Hashem formed. Vayitzer means and he formed. It's not and he created, which is a very interesting idea, because creation, Bria, which is the first word of the Torah, Bereshit, here, I'm just going to hold my cursor there. So you've got Vayitzar. I'm going to scroll all the way quickly back to the beginning of the Torah, Bereshit. Bereshit bara. In the beginning, Hashem created. Create and formed over here are two different words, because creation is to have nothing and then have something. The creation that we speak of in the beginning of Genesis is the creation. What I love is, I don't speak any Latin, but already by the time I was 13 or 14, I had some really fantastic words under my belt, like ex nihilo, anthropomorphic. These are just some of the words that most Chabad Hasidic 14-year-olds, 13-year-olds have under their belt, because when you learn some of these texts with their literal translation, that's how things are translated. Yesh ma'ayin, which means something from nothing, is always translated accurately in the text, ex nihilo, from nothing. So there was nothing, an immeasurable. It was immeasurable. It was of the infinite nature, therefore not measurable, non-graspable, uncontained, unable to be perceived, because the infinite cannot be perceived. And then there was something, Bereshis, there was creation. Over here, Vayitzar Hashem Elikim, Hashem formed, means that there is a substance to work with, and it's being formed into something else. And I want you to think about, when do we create and when do we form? If you think about dinner, you all had dinner, I hope, in the last couple hours, and you didn't make dinner, you didn't create dinner, you formed dinner. You took existing vegetables, you took existing meat, you took existing other substances, and you may have cooked, you may have diced, you may have sliced, you may have heated up, you may have cooled down, but you just formed. And you don't have anything that's ridiculously different looking to what you had before. Even an egg is not ridiculously different to a raw egg. Okay, a raw egg is clear and yellow, and a cooked egg is that, but it's not like, well, I actually had no substance, and now I do. I mean, condensing air into water is pretty cool, because I don't see anything and then it becomes water. But as soon as you understand that air is everywhere, and air is actually a whole lot of molecules of gas just doing its thing, it's no longer that cool that you can turn air into liquid. But Bereshis is that there is nothing. There is no traceable origin, and then there is something. Vayitzer means there is a traceable origin, and it has been formed into something else. And you think about one of the few things, really, I'm going to give you two amazing examples. Yeah, I'm going to just stop here for a sec. I'm going to stop the share so we can just talk for a moment. There are two phenomenal moments of creation that we can all relate to. One is when you have an idea. When you have an idea, all of a sudden, something pops into your head. There was nothing. You didn't have an idea. You didn't have anything with which to build an idea. You didn't even look for the idea. And then suddenly you've got this massive idea. Now, of course, you'll say, but there are things that were triggered and there were previous learnings. Okay, yeah, fine. But let's just think about this notion of a new idea. It is one of the closest things that we get to of saying there was nothing and then there was something. But it's not a true something from nothing, because, as I just pointed out, there are some origins even to an idea, even to the spark of inspiration. But another example of which basically is nothing, and then you have something, is the creation of the human, or the creation of life, full stop. You have nothing. You've got a cell. You've got two cells. You've got two cells that are completely non-conscious, microscopic blobs. And then 9 months later, you've got a full-on human being. And yes, it is from soul replication and regeneration, and there's all sorts of cool magic that happens in the world of biology. It's fantastic. But just think about it. Two cells, conscious human being. There is basically nothing, and we have then something. These are some of the examples of the closest thing that we have in our reality, in our physical reality, of something from nothing. And the truth is, it's something from something. But it's the best we've got as humans, because there is no such thing as something from nothing. There is no such thing as something from nothing in this world. And that is one of the big challenges, even of the Big Bang Theory, is, okay, but what was? Why did it happen? How did it happen? And what was before the Big Bang? And that's not me attacking the Big Bang Theory. It's me highlighting the very real questions that science has. Science has these questions and has to opt out of really dealing with them, because we're moving beyond what is traceable and measurable. So where are you going to put your resources? In tracing the untraceable, or tracing all the traceable since then? So something from nothing is not really something we can relate to. This word something's now coming up too many times in each sentence. But we've got a couple good examples, like the creation of life, like the birth of an idea. These are something from nothing. But when we talk about Bereshis, in the beginning, Bara Elokim, Hashem created, there was nothing, and then there was something. Now let me go back to the Vayitzar Ha'adam. I've got so sidetracked with these critical words that where's my window? Hold on. Okay. Okay. Where is it? Okay, I'm going to have to close that again. Try again. Okay, so we've got Vayitzer Hashem, and Hashem formed Es Ha'adam, the human, Afar min Adama, from dust of the earth. So look at this word, Ha'adama. I'm going to highlight. Here we are. Look, Aleph, Daled, Mem. Same as over here, Aleph, Daled, Mem. Es Ha'adam, the person, Min Ha'adama, from the earth. So the fact that the Torah has got this linked terminology is telling us that not only does Hashem form the human, and by the way, look at this. Vayikra Elokim la'or, he called to the light, and he called the night, and it was evening and it was morning on the first day. Let's go here. Just going to skip a couple days. And Hashem said, let the great luminaries of the sky separate between night and day. So notice, and Hashem said, and that's what they turned out to be. And Hashem made the two great things. We're talking about the sun and the moon. Then we've got Vayomer Elokim, and Hashem said, there should be swarms of living creatures in the water, and there should be birds. Vayivra Elokim, and Hashem created Hataninim Agdolim, the great reptiles, and all the animals. And he blessed them. Over here, Vayomer Elokim, and Hashem said, okay, so you get my point. There's lots of speaking and lots of doing, making. This is the first time. Where am I? This is the first time that we have, and he formed, not and he spoke and they came to be. So this is I'm really hammering this so you realize the significance of this verse 7. This is not just the creation of the human. There is a language change here. There is a behavioral change on God's part. Hashem forms us from the earth and then does something crazy. And this is going to completely undo everything I told you last week. Vayipach ba'apav nishmas chayim. And he blew into his nostrils the breath of life. And he blew into his nostrils the breath of life. Now, the only way you're going to really understand what I'm about to get excited about, or what I've already got excited about, is by me asking you to take a deep breath in. Just take a deep breath in. And notice, where does that breath go? It's going deep within you. And now what I want you to do is breathe out. When you breathe out, where are you breathing from? Yes, you're breathing out of your mouth or out of your nose, but actually you're breathing from deep within. You're breathing out from deep within. Now what I want you to do is do it. We're going to breathe even deeper. Just put your hand on your stomach, and I want you to breathe in from your diaphragm. So breathing in, so your stomach is expanding. And then once you're full, begin to breathe out and just feel your stomach as you with your hand there. And this is about as deep breathing as you can get. Now, if we were going to do a really cool breathing exercise, I'd make you breathe from your toes. And of course, it's not like the diaphragm, but breathe so deep that you feel a tingling in your toes and then breathing out. So when we breathe and when we blow, it's not just external. It's coming from deep within. And when my hand's down here, deep within is my chest, my stomach. This is like when you feel stuff, where do you feel? I don't mean when you feel pain. I'm talking about when you feel emotion. You feel it here in your chest and your stomach. You know, when you feel butterflies, you feel it in your stomach. When you feel anxious, you feel it in your chest. When you feel happy, you feel it in your chest. You don't feel happy here. You don't feel happy in your hands. You feel happy in this deep part. When you experience deep emotions, it's going to be going on over here. So vayipach ba'apav nishmas chayim, and he breathed into him the breath of life. So look at this juxtaposition. We have the creation of the human. The creation of the human from the dust of the earth, the most humble origins, the most tangible and inanimate. That's what we are. We are just walking dust. We are just a bunch of rocks. We're not wilde chayes, we're not wild animals. We are not powerful energies like birds and air. We are the earth. You say, but Menachem, you said the earth was quite a special thing because it came quite early in creation last week when I spoke. Yep, in the previous class I did say its origin is quite high, but at the end of the day, as it plays out, it's the bottom of everything. Everything falls to the earth. When you build a beautiful building, it sits on top of the earth. When you walk around, you walk on top of the earth. The earth is the most humble of all energy. And so the human is just rock. Not just is it rock, but when Hashem finished forming the golem that is a person, the human, Hashem forms it in the earth. What was Hashem left with? A lifeless corpse.
But what about what he created on the sixth day?
What that's what I'm talking about.
When we were talking about day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6, on the sixth day, then he created. Or are we on the same passage?
We're on the sixth day. We're going into detail of what happened on the sixth day. So no worries. So we're talking about on the sixth day. So we've got a lifeless corpse. And then vayipach ba'apav nishmas chayim, Hashem breathes into the human the breath of life. Hashem has not used the breath of life on anything. It says the birds, and they came to be. And he said, let there be light, and there was light. Let there be an ocean, and there was an ocean. Let there be animals, and there are animals. Hashem has not formed anything, and Hashem has not breathed life into anything. And from here we see a completely different origin of the human being. Now, why am I getting so fixated on that when we breathe, it's from deep within? Is because there is a very powerful spiritual narrative going on here. Deep within, When I talk about deep within, when you talk about there's something deep within, you're talking about deep within your psyche, deep within your consciousness, deep within your emotion, deep within who you are. You don't mean when there's something deep within, around 30 centimeters or whatever into beyond my sternum, you will find I have some pretty strong feelings that I need to get off my chest. No, there's deep within is deep within our psyche. And so Vayipach ba'apav nishmas chaim, when Hashem breathes, of course Hashem hasn't got lips and hasn't got lungs, and therefore obviously this is an emanation of energy that is radiating from deep within. Deep within is higher than Elohim. Bereshis bara Elokim, in the beginning the infinite created. Hashem created a natural order, created from nothing. Something came to be. That, no worries. But that's Hashem doing what Hashem does. When we say deep within, we're going behind that. The human receives life from a deeper source than creation itself, yet the human is designed from the most basic, mundane physical substance. And so the human is this strange juxtaposition of the highest and lowest energies. Now, just pause. I'm going to say one more thing, and then I'm going to stop for questions. Last week, I said that the human was the last of the creations, which means that we are at the end of the creative process. We are the furthest thing from the idea. There is an idea, and we get going with the idea, and then we have got the last part. It's the least important. It's the last part. But on the other hand, it's the most important because it's the crowning component. It's what finishes the job, right? So that's an interesting thing. But now we've got all of creation and the magic of creation being culminating with a creation of an entity that is being created and enlivened with an energy that lies deep within the creator, deep within the infinite, in a higher state, from a higher state than creation itself. And what Kabbalah learns from this, and a whole lot of other stuff, but I'm just sandwiching it into here. I'm just compressing it into here. What Kabbalah learns from this is that sorry, I completely lost my train of thought. What Kabbalah learns from this is that the human is the original desire of creation. Why did Hashem create a world? Why did Hashem create a universe? Why did Hashem create a planet? Why did Hashem put water on that planet? Why did Hashem put animals on that planet? Why did Hashem put plants on the planet? Why? So that there could be a human. Why is not what we're getting into right now. But the ultimate goal of building everything was so that there could be a human. And once the human is formed, Hashem breathes from deep within. This is such an intimate. This is like CPR, placing one's mouth on the mouth and the nostrils of someone else, and breathes life from self and gives it over to the dying person or the dead person opposite, and breathing life itself into it. Hashem is saying, this is the very thing I wish to enliven. Everything else is just infrastructure so that this thing can live. This is my entity. This is my human. It's B'Tsalmi. It's in my image, and I will form it from the earth, and I will breathe life into it. The human is the purpose of creation. Why? Not now. Why will come, and we've actually touched on it a bit last week, and we're going to touch on it in the future, but I'm not going to be sucked into that right now. But I want to point out, this is the most important creation because it's coming from deep within. So when if any of you should be so blessed to build a mall, you don't build a mall because you're a mall builder. You build a mall because you want to make money. You build a mall because you want to change the shopping experience, right? It's not about the bricks. It's about what you're going to achieve with the bricks. It's not about the world and the universe that's been created. It's what can be achieved with that universe. And achievement will be within humanity. And that is going to bring us to tonight's second half. What is the achievement of humanity? And my answer is right now, I'm just, because that way I don't forget what I'm going to teach you, is choice, free choice. And with that, we're going to be introduced to the Garden of Eden, the snake, the fruit, Adam and Eve, and that whole story of what happened with the tree of knowledge. That's the second half of tonight. I'm going to pause. I'm going to let you ask any questions.
So I just want to cap something that you said. So what you're saying is that when God made animals, he made them, including plants and including fish and including birds, he made them originally alive. They were just made alive. Is that right? Breathing and alive. Yeah. Whereas with man, he didn't do that. He gave part of himself to man, part of his breath, which is part of himself, into man to make him alive from a formed object which was not alive. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Great summary. We could have saved ourselves 30 minutes.
No, but I wouldn't be able to come to that conclusion until you told us that.
Thank you, Chaim. Any other questions before we move on what I've said?
I have one.
Go, Benny.
So on Perek 1, on when he first talked about the creation, he goes, Vayivra Elohim et Adam b'tzalmo, etc., etc.
Yeah.
But what you were saying now, but I forgot, Vayetzer,
yeah,
which is after Perek 2, Pasuk 7.
Yeah.
So initially he goes Vayivra.
Yes.
And on Perek 2, which I just skimmed through while you were talking, it's kind of in a way like a summary.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a summary or not. That's kind of how I read it. Right.
Yeah.
So it goes, Perek 1 is describing day 1, this happened, day 2, this happened. Day 6, he created man with Salmo, he talked to the angels, etc. All of we spoke last week. But only on Perek 2, when he starts, I guess he, in a way, right, when the summary, then he goes on
so I'm gonna repeat Benny's question just so everyone understands. That's why I've got this on the screen. Vayivra, in chapter 1 it says Vayivra Elokim, and God created. So what are you saying, Menachem? That was, yes, later on it says in verse 7 of the next chapter, it says Vayitzer Hashem Elokim es Adam, and he formed. So that's a nice, I've taught you something really nice, but I've casually glossed over what Benny has picked up on, which is Vayivra Elokim, that originally says, and Hashem created. And I got all excited how bara is creation, ex nihilo, all that jazz, but humankind was completely different because it was Vayitzer. I thought I could get away with that. Benny, I sincerely thought I could get away with it because in truth, there's a whole other class in that. But now that you've forced me, I'm going to have to try to wedge a very interesting teaching into our share.
I'm sorry.
No. You're taking me into one of my favorite subjects.
God created God formed the body, but gave part of himself to create a living man with intelligence.
I'm going to go down a slightly different path. But I see where you've come at that, Chaim. So Hashem creates in his image. I just need to talk about souls for a moment. We all have a soul. Everything has a soul. Every animal has a soul. Every plant has a soul because everything has some sort of energy that is constantly creating it and giving it the power to exist and the power to live. And that is actually learned out of what we've been looking at till now in the first chapter of Bereshis, but I can't bring that all out to you right now because that's a whole other class. What did Hashem create in in the first chapter versus what did Hashem form in the second chapter is explained that Hashem created the form of the human as a concept. So Hashem creates the form of the human. In the consciousness of the infinite, there is an image of what the human is and creates it masculine and feminine. That's what is created. But it's created in an ethereal universe, in a conceptual universe. And then Vayitzer is, and then it's moving the idea into a formed physical entity. And so Hashem creates, what we're learning from here is that in creation, we have, the creation of an idea, and then we have the physical creation that mirrors and becomes a manifestation of the conceptual idea. Because the Torah tells us this, gives us this two-stage thing with the human, we discover that the whole idea, which I said before, which is the original idea, was that there should be a human, and then that human, which is what we're going to get to in the second half of tonight. And so the Vayivra is not the creation of the human that is Adam, the person. It is the creation of the concept, and then it is formed in earth and then breathed life into. You say, well, what about everything else? So because the Torah doesn't tell us that about anything else. The Torah doesn't tell us about anything else being formed. The Torah tells us everything was created. Now, that means Hashem conceived and transplanted the idea into physicality. So imagine you could cut out an idea from your consciousness and make it real, as opposed to come up with an idea, then source the material and make it. Everything else was created conceptually and transplanted, except the human. Again, this highlights how much higher the spiritual source of everything else besides the human is. It's a transplant of the God consciousness into physicality, as opposed to the human, which is an evolution of God consciousness into reality. But it's an evolution, and it's an evolution in the form that it keeps going. It's a physical evolution, and it becomes more and more physical until eventually there is a physical formation in dust, and then injecting Vayipach Ba'apov. Now, why that is so much cooler? You'd be like, okay, big whoop, transplant. What is he saying? Why is that cooler? Is because to transplant something from here to there, it's a cool trick. It's a very cool party trick. But when something devolves, when something is coming into physical being because the spiritual is becoming condensed until it becomes dust of the earth, you would think that it has become so limited that it couldn't possibly hold, retain, or be injected with a super spiritual power. It's like you can't just take energy from a reactor and put it into your toaster. It'll blow your toaster up. A toaster requires not even three-phase power. It requires that the power systems in your house break down the energy so that you're not getting too high a voltage to your toaster, right? So Hashem creates a toaster and then puts a nuclear reactor into the toaster, and the toaster doesn't explode. The toaster doesn't explode. Now, I'm just going to say one more thing on this subject, but do not tempt me. Please don't tempt me. Second pasuk of the Torah, V'ha'aretz ha'isatoyu v'avoyu, and the earth was being unformed and void. Toyu v'avoyu means chaos. This is a reference to that there is this state of chaos al pnei tahom, on the surface of the deep. We do not have physical existence yet. We've got some sort of spiritual oret, some sort of spiritual thing going on here. Tohu vavohu is a reference, Kabbalah talks about this, is a reference to a previous universe, not a previous physical universe, not some remnant with alien life, a previous spiritual universe, which exists in a chaotic state. And the reason for that chaotic state is because the energy of that universe and the entities of that universe could not marry up. And so we've got this explosion of concept. I don't know, even know why I'm saying this. This is like a 3-part series right here, but I've got to say it. And that's the tohu vavohu, that's the chaos. And then Hashem creates the world as we know it. Except one thing, the human is created b'tselem Elokim, in the image of God. And the significance of that is because Hashem is all energy in a united form. And Hashem creates us out of the offer, out of the most physical dust, according to the plans of the original concept, but then puts a nuclear reactor inside of us. The human soul is a whole other energy system, and we don't explode. We don't explode like the tohu vavohu of verse 2 of the pasuk. We don't explode like the original chaos of energy that existed before existence. And so basically, if there's anything that I want you to take out of what I've just said, is that the human soul and the human existence is a completely different beast to anything else that exists. It is a divine reality that is like no other, and therefore the only one that is created, b'tselem, that is created in the image of Hashem. Nothing else is created in the image of Hashem, because there is something completely different going on here with the human. And so that is all an answer. And so therefore we've got the creation of the human form, vayivra, and then we've got the creation of the human physical entity, vayitza. All right, Benny, that's that. You ask a Kabbalistic question, you're going to get a Kabbalistic answer. So I'm gonna move on now. Okay. All right.
Okay.
All right. I'm going to move on. I'm going to move on to what we advertised we would talk about, which is we want to. Well, we've answered the first question, which I said we'd cover in this session, which is, in what way is the human different from all other species? I think I've shared a little bit of that. And last week I also spoke about how the human walks upright. It's an interesting idea that you have the mind, the brain above the heart, the mind above the emotions, over impulse. So brain, heart, kidneys, or brain, heart, stomach. We are different. We're different in that we're created in the image. We are different in the nature of how we were even created, as Benny brought our attention to. We are different in so many ways. So I've covered that. Now, where is the human at this point? And I will show you where the human is. If we come back to our thing, our parsha, we're still in Bereshit. So we've got, I'm in chapter 2. He forms them. And then in verse 8 of chapter 2, Vayita Hashem Elokim Gan Eden Mikedem, Hashem planted a garden in Eden. Oh my gosh, if I could just dissect that sentence, you would trip out. Oh, it's amazing. In the east of what? Can't do that now. And placed there the man, the human, who he had formed. So Vayita Hashem Elokim Gan Ba'eden, Hashem planted a garden in Eden. All right. I'm trying to restrain myself. Mikedem in the east, Vayosem Shom Es Adam Asher Yotzo, and he places the human there. Okay, I'm going to stop. You can. Okay, I can't control myself. V'nohar Yotze, I've skipped 2 verses, and a river went out from Eden, Lahashkes Es Agan, to water the garden. Okay. Before I get to what is going on in the Garden of Eden, I need to tell you about the Garden of Eden, because the Torah doesn't say, and they were in Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden. It says that he created a garden within Eden. And there is a river that flows from Eden to water the Gan. Gan means garden in Hebrew. So we talk about, oh yes, the Garden of Eden, Gan Eden. But it seems like Gan is a place within Eden. There is this broader thing called Eden, but we also discover that it's not a garden within Eden because there's a river going from Eden to the garden. So the garden exists within a paradigm of Eden, exists as a result of a paradigm of Eden. When we talk about death in Judaism, Esther Diveroli, thank you for the permission. She says, don't restrain myself. If I don't, we'll be here till midnight. When we talk about death in Judaism, and we say, oh yes, the souls are in the Nishmas Eden, that the soul is in Eden. When where do souls go after we die? Where do we go after we die? We go to the Garden of Eden. We go to the gardens within Eden, and which is where it all begins. And maybe there are some who can transcend the garden within Eden and end up in Eden itself. What we're discovering here is that there are many, many layers of entity that exist. And of course, this world is below it all. We've got Eden, we've got the river, we've got the garden, which Adam and Eve have been placed into, which Adam has been placed into, and then we've got the pasuk of Adam and Eve being split. Okay? And then after they eat from the tree of knowledge, check this out. After they eat from the tree of knowledge, okay. I'm just gonna have to skip a bit here. Vayikach Hashem, he put him in the garden, right? Vayikach Hashem Adam vayinecheu began Eden, and placed him in the Garden of Eden. La'avda l'shamra, to work it and to guard it. That was my whole spiel last week about our responsibility within the ecosystem. We're here to work it and guard it. Blah, blah, blah. Hashem says, don't eat from the tree, but from the tree of knowledge of good and bad. Don't eat it. Because the day that you eat from it, you will die. And that's what we're going to get into in a moment. Then Hashem says it's not good for the human to be alone, and therefore I'll create a corresponding a corresponding helper, something that can face it, and that is where Adam becomes Adam and Eve. Okay, yeah, we've got all sorts of lovely stuff going on, and then we've got the snake. The woman replied to the serpent, "We may eat of the fruit of the other trees of the garden." I'm running through this very quickly for a reason, but not to take you through the story. I want you to see what happens at the end of the story. Okay, they eat from it, and Hashem calls out and says, Ayeka, where are you? What's going on? You've eaten from the tree. You didn't listen to my voice, and now I'm not happy, says Hashem. And then Hashem punishes everyone. We'll get there in a moment. And over here, there's a bit of a conversation around what are the punishments for the man and for the woman, etc. Pregnancy is going to be painful. All sorts of stuff's happening. Really crazy stuff. And then Vaishalcheu Hashem Elikim Megan Eden. Hashem banished them from the Garden of Eden to till the soil from which he was taken. So I just need you to get to this part of the story, the end of the story. Vayigaresh es Adam, and he drove the man out and stationed east of the Garden of Eden, and stationed east of the Garden of Eden. Okay, so we have Eden. We have the river that waters the garden. That the garden is where Adam and Eve are. Then they get up to no good and they eat from the tree of knowledge, and they're removed from the garden that is within Eden. And where do they end up? In the world as we know it, in the physical world. So when we live in the physical world. We do not live in the Garden of Eden. When we die, we rise up to the garden, and we keep rising from the garden to the river to Eden itself. These are the multiple stages of reality after death. These are states of consciousness, of course, not physical locations like Africa or Australia or the Americas. This is a whole other thing. So this is how I want to introduce the Garden of Eden. What is the Garden of Eden? Is a garden, it's a dimension of reality. But this is what is so different from that very first day, is that when Adam and Eve are placed in the Garden of Eden, when they are placed in the Garden of Eden, it is a reality which is a spiritual concept called the Garden of Eden, existing within a physical reality that becomes the Garden of Eden. And after they eat from the tree of knowledge of good and bad, those two entities separate. The concept of the Garden of Eden becomes a spiritual concept, which is no longer physically anchored. And the physical reality that is left behind, where Adam and Eve, the humans, begin to really live life, is not the Garden of Eden. So that means for a few hours, and I'll tell you why we're talking about a few hours shortly. For a few hours, the Garden of Eden and the physical universe is one. And after they eat from the tree of knowledge, the two become separate. And we'll have to understand why. How does that happen? And what is the practical significance of that? We'll get to in a second. So I've just explained what is the Garden of Eden. What is the tree of knowledge? What is the tree of knowledge? Well, we said it's called the Eitz Hadas Tov V'Ra. Whoa, before I get to what is the tree of knowledge, are there any questions on the Garden of Eden in what I've said so far? Are there any questions of what I've said?
So for me, there's probably nothing to do with it. For me, the Garden of Eden is just a protection for man in his early stage, like children who live with babies and whatever, live with parents. And then when they're able to understand things and have their own knowledge of good and evil, etc., they can then be let out from parents. That's the way I see Garden of Eden.
Okay, it's what you've said is nice, but I need it to live in a far more complex state for the sake of the class, for the sake of what we're exploring here. But yes, we can take it and really turn it into some very workable concepts and ideas that we can live with, as you've just shared. Are there any other questions about Eden, river, garden, physical dimension of reality?
Yeah. Why was it such a bad and terrible and unforgivable sin? So why couldn't Adam and Eve teshuva be like, oh, sorry, like, oh, sorry, we
So
mean
that's gonna, Benny, that's gonna be the next point we're gonna explore. That's exactly what we're gonna have to look at. What is this tree that it is so so tragic that they ate from it? We'll get there in one sec.
Okay.
Any
Is
other?
it a physical place?
So the Garden of Eden was a physical space, and then after they eat from the tree, it becomes a non-physical space. Okay. So at this point of the story, it is a physical place. It is like, it's not a good metaphor, but it'll work. You know, when little kids dress up in fantasy clothing and they go into the backyard and they're in fantasy land. Is the backyard fantasy land? In that moment, the backyard is 100% fantasy land. It's very real. There are real fairies and there are real kings and queens and all sorts of things. I mean, you can see the 3-year-old is walking around in medieval robes. This is a very real fantasy land. And then when you talk to that 3-year-old when they turn 33, you say, my child, this backyard, you used to play the most amazing fairyland. The 33-year-old still has the fairyland, but it's completely in their head. When they look at the backyard, they just see trees, grass, chairs, table. when they were three, the two were merged. It was a very real fantasy land. They were in fantasy land. There were no chairs, there were no tables, there were thrones, and there were stages and castles, and there were no trees, but there were forbidden forests and fairies and everything. So what happened between 3 and 33? When a child is 3, we have an integrated reality of physical and creative. And when we become 33, we separate the creative from the physical. And therefore the garden is a garden and the creative memories are creative memories. Now, that is not what the Garden of Eden was, but I'm using that to help you understand an integrated spiritual physical reality that then becomes a separate spiritual reality and a physical reality. All right. That work for you, Esther? Cool.
Yep. Thank
All right.
you.
So let's roll on, because we're running, we're being pushed for time. I'm not going to rush it. I'm just going to go through what we can, and if need be, I will save a few things for the next class, because I do have a bit of wriggle room in the 5th class. This is the 3rd. What was the tree of knowledge? So the Torah says the tree of knowledge, that the tree of knowledge, it's called the Eitz Hadas Tov Hara. It's the tree of knowledge of good and bad. I think I'm going to save the tree of knowledge for next week, because the easiest way to really begin understanding the tree of knowledge is by first understanding the snake. So I'd like to just spend the last part of tonight talking about the snake, and then next week we'll pick up with the tree. The snake. So we've got this Nachash, and there's a lot of Kabbalah about the word Nachash. And the letter Nun, which is the first letter of the word Nachash. I'll just show you what a letter Nun looks like. Okay. Getting lots of final Nuns. I want you to see where's Nachash? Where's a Nun? Here's a Nun. Here, this letter. See, it's got the 2 right angles. That's a Nun. The word Nun, the letter Nun is as a hieroglyph, it's actually shaped like a snake. Look at the final Nun. I'll just which is a Nun as it appears at the end of a word. Suddenly I've got Nun. Where's the final Nun?
Let's go up to chapter 17. I mean,
verse 17. I've got a final Nun.
The 3rd to last, right below that. Yeah, right below.
Oh, there. Very good. Thanks, Benny. There. It's Ovain. The last letter is a Nun. It's like a stretched out snake. So the letter Nun corresponds to a snake. So Nachash, the first letter of the word snake, Nachash means snake, is the letter Nun, which is a symbol of a snake in the Hebrew alphabet. Anyway, the Nachash is not a snake as we understand it. The Nachash is a very complex character. It speaks to Adam and Eve. So you all know the story. They're in the Garden of Eden, and the snake says, "Come, we're going to eat from the tree." I've really condensed the story, but that's the point that you need to know. So we've got a snake that talks. It seems to walk. And as Rashi tells us, and as the commentators tell us, it's got hands and legs. And how do we know that? Because if you look further on, Hashem punishes the snake by removing its hands and legs and says, you are going to slither along the earth, which means up until now, it has not been slithering. The snake is a phenomenal creature that seems to almost be human. It can converse with a human, unlike any other species Hashem has created. But what's interesting about it is it's very fixated on Adam and Eve eating from the one tree in the garden that Hashem has said, you can eat from any tree in this garden, just don't eat from the tree of knowledge of good and bad. Now, interestingly, and this is not for now, this is for next week, but I'll just point out, interestingly, they could have eaten from the tree as soon as Shabbos began, which is some hours later. It's not that Hashem said you'll never be able to eat from it. It's that Hashem says, don't eat from it right now. Had they waited until it got dark and then eaten from it, it would have been the end of the story. We never would have been here, but it would have been the completion of creation and the end and the purpose fulfilled. And we'll get to why next week. Why do we not go that way? And is God losing control of his very creation? Is this an algorithm that's bigger than God? No, it's not, but not for now. But the Nachash is an entity that tells Adam and Eve to do something that they've been told not to do. The Nachash, the snake, is ego. It is the evil inclination. At this point of the human's development, the evil inclination, the ego, is an entity that exists outside of the self. And what that means is that the human is able to observe selfish, self-centered, corrupted behavior and reject it. It's not that ego doesn't exist. It's that ego exists outside of self. That negative tendencies don't exist within the self, but outside of the self, and work to draw a person to something rather than drive a person to something. When we choose to do things wrong now, it's coming from within us. At this point of the story, Adam and Eve have no interest at all from eating from the tree of knowledge. It's not until the Nachash says, let's eat from it. And Chava says, no. Chava says, I don't want to eat from it. And then the snake tricks Chava and says, look, I touched the fruit and nothing happened. And that trick is a very important trick, because Hashem didn't say don't touch the fruit. Hashem said don't eat the fruit. Don't eat from this tree. Never said don't touch the tree. Never said don't sit under the shade of the tree. So the snake tricks them and says, look, I touched it, nothing happened, and gets them lost in this false commandment of don't touch the tree, don't touch the fruit. And when the snake holds the fruit and says, look, nothing's happening, he breaks down Chava's resistance and says, let's eat the fruit. And Chava eats the fruit. I'm going to now throw some really wild stuff at you, which we're going to pick up next week, which is eating of the fruit is not just picking a fruit off a tree and eating it. But when we look at the mystical writings, at the midrashic writings of what goes on, the eating of the fruit is a sexual encounter between Chava and the snake. Chava and the snake have some sort of sexual union, and it feels good, and it's pretty nice. Then Chava goes to Adam and says, I just had the fruit. And Adam says, you what? You can't eat the fruit. And she says, I touched it and nothing happened. And I've engaged with it. And it's good. It feels right. It feels amazing. Yeah, have it. And then Adam has from it. And we've got another corrupted sexual activity that takes place, which I'm going to take all that apart. So we've got this narrative of the eating of the fruit, which the Kabbalah then learns an incredible sexual dance taking place. And it's very important that we acknowledge this story, because the tree is called the tree of knowledge. Let me just show you that we all were kids once upon a time, and we all know how to laugh at the word knowledge. I'm going to show you the word knowledge as it appears in Genesis. Here. Va'adam yada es Chava. This is the beginning of chapter 4. Now the man knew his wife, and she conceived. Knew? How does knowing lead to conception? It's because knowing is an intimate relationship. When you know something, it is intimately one with you. When you have an idea, it's not one with you. It's bigger than you. When you develop ideas, when you analyze ideas, they're not one with you. You've got them all laid out in front of you. When you know something, 1 + 1 = 2. You know it. You didn't have to think it. You didn't have to. It comes out. It's one with you. Much as when a couple experience sexual union at that peak time of that union, they know one another. Knowing in the Torah is sexual intimacy. And so when we've got a tree of knowledge of good and bad, it is not just intellectual knowledge, it is to become intimate with good and bad. Intimate means it becomes a part of self. It moves internally. The Nachash impregnates good and bad into Chava. It moves from being an external force into an intimate force. And then Chava is intimate with Adam in a knowing way, not to reproduce, not to create children, to share all that is good and bad. This is the impregnation. This is the impregnation of ego into the human. It was once external, and now the Nachash has caused the negative to become a part of the human psyche. And Hashem blows his top. It's like, I cannot believe it. I created a world which has good and bad, but I've kept them separate. And I just blink for a moment and boom, they're impregnating themselves with all sorts of negativity. And now I've got a corrupt species. I've got a species that was pure good and it had an external force, and it has suddenly become this integrated tree, just as the tree was an integrated body of good and bad in one, but it was a separate tree. And now Adam and Chava are with the fruit. They are living off the energy of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and bad. Okay, we're going to talk more about that next week. And we're going to talk a bit more about the snake next week. But I just need to finish with a couple Mythbuster moments, which is, what was the fruit? Well, I can tell you one thing, it wasn't an apple. We do not have a source that says it was an apple. The apple is a Christian idea. The apple is a Christian idea that from Christian artwork. If anyone's been to Venice, you'll see lots of apples. The closest thing to an apple is that we have the smell of Gan Eden was like that of an apple orchard, a chakal tapuchin. It's an Aramaic term that comes up in Kabbalah. It had the smell of an apple orchard. So it has a beautiful smell, but the tree of knowledge was not an apple tree. There are different arguments as to what the fruit was and what the tree was, and whether the tree was even a tree, or was it a bush, or was it grain? Was it an esrog? Was it the citron that we use on Sukkot? Or was it another very popular opinion is that it was grapes, and that makes a lot of sense in context of the power of wine. So what wine does and the transformative power of wine and the intoxication of wine. And now we've got Adam and Chava experiencing an intoxicated spiritual reality and everything that goes along with that. And wine brings out everything within us. When you drink too much alcohol, secrets start coming out, the good and the bad. Anyway, there's a whole stuff on that, but that's not going to be part of this series. But I just need to myth bust the apple. It is not an apple. And now you can tell all your friends, I know what it wasn't. It wasn't an apple. I showed you before on the text that in the pasuk it says that if you eat from it, you're going to die. But we see Adam and Chava didn't die. And I'm going to have to leave that for next week. I can't get into that. And as a result, I can't get into the final question that we were going to answer tonight, which was, what is the purpose of creation? Because the purpose of creation is buried in the story of the eating from the tree. So I'm going to carry on with this next week. I'm sorry that we couldn't get to it this week, but that's why it's a 5-part series, because I've got 4.5 parts of content, and I knew that I wouldn't be able to spread it. I just knew. I had a premonition. Oh, quite a prophet. Self-fulfilling. So we'll continue that next week. I'm going to stop the recording, and then we'll take some questions.